The drizzle turned the fields into mirrors, each puddle reflecting the ghost of a sky that refused to break. The children did not speak. Their mouths were too dry, their bellies too hollow. Every few steps, the boy whimpered, and May tightened her grip on his tiny hand, whispering, not in comfort but in rhythm, "Just a little farther, just a little farther." By the time they reached the edge of town, the world smelled of horses and wet iron. Wooden porches leaned under the weight of rain. Signs squeaked on rusted hinges. People moved behind windows like shadows, silent, suspicious, the way the frontier learned to be after too many winters and too few prayers answered. A dog barked once and fell quiet, sensing hunger that had forgotten shame. May paused outside the general store. The painted letters had peeled until only the word "Mercy" faintly showed, part of an old advertisement for sewing needles. She took it as a sign and stepped inside. The bell above the door gave a single weak ring. Warmth hit her, the smell of tobacco, flour, and damp wool. Behind the counter stood a man with spectacles and a hat too fine for a place like this. He looked her over as one might inspect an object, not a person. She lifted the linen bundle, unwrapping it with hands trembling from both cold and fear. "Please," she said softly, her accent still holding the music of faraway hills. "Will you buy this?" The dress unfurled like a dying flower. Silk petals draped over her arms, edges frayed but still glimmering faintly under the oil lamp. The man stared, then frowned. "Ain't worth much here," he muttered. "No one need a fancy rag like that." He gestured toward the door. "Try the undertaker. He buys cloth for shrouds." Her daughter, Ian, let out a tiny cough that sounded like the start of a prayer. May quickly wrapped the dress again, bowed her head, and backed out into the rain. The man's eyes followed her until the door closed, and even then, he spat into the stove as though to wash the sight from his store. They tried the seamstress next. Then the saloon, where laughter broke like glass against the sight of her. The women turned away, adjusting their bonnets. The men smirked, whispering words she didn't understand but knew too well. Each rejection carved deeper into the hollow of her chest until pride was no longer a shield but a wound. At last, they came to the town center, a muddy square where a church stood, its bell silent, its doors shut tight. May sank to her knees near the well. She set the bundle on her lap and stared at it. The silk was wet now, heavy with rain. For a long while, she said nothing. The children pressed close, seeking warmth she didn't have. Ian whispered, "Mama, are we bad?" May shook her head slowly, eyes unfocused. "No, little one. The world is just blind." The wind changed, carrying the smell of horses, leather, sweat, and wild grass. Somewhere beyond the square, hooves struck earth in a rhythm too deliberate for a passing rider. She turned her head slightly and saw him. A tall man on a chestnut horse, broad-shouldered and silent, his hat pulled low. His coat was dark with rain, and a rifle rested easy across his saddle. He looked like the kind of man who spoke less than he thought, who carried his loneliness like a scar he didn't bother to hide. The townsmen tipped their hats out of habit but didn't greet him. He was not one of them. He was the kind who lived beyond fences and laws. A settler, a rancher, one of those who built a life from the bones of land no one else wanted. His name was Eli Shepherd, though she wouldn't know that yet. He slowed his horse, eyes narrowing at the sight of her. The soaked woman, 2 children pressed against her sides, and a bundle that looked like hope refusing to die. He didn't speak, didn't move closer, just watched, while the rain filled the space between them with something wordless and almost sacred. May lowered her gaze, mistaking silence for judgment. She rose unsteadily and walked toward him. Her knees trembled. The mud clung to her skirts as if to keep her from going forward. When she reached the edge of the square, she unwrapped the linen again. The silk dress drooped, pale against the gray air. She lifted it toward him with both hands. "Sir," she said, "will you buy my wedding dress? My children have not eaten for 5 days." The world seemed to stop breathing. The rain fell softer, like it too was listening. Eli looked from her face to the children, the little boy half asleep on her shoulder, the girl's eyes too old for her years. He said nothing. His jaw moved slightly, as if words were something foreign to his tongue. For a moment, she thought he would turn away like all the others. Instead, he swung down from his horse. His boots sank into the mud beside her. He towered, but there was no threat in his stillness. He reached out and touched the edge of the fabric, rough fingers grazing silk that once touched a happier world. He didn't take it. He only let it fall back into her arms. Then he looked at her, truly looked, and spoke, voice low and steady as the thunder that rolled over the hills. "Don't sell what made you human." She blinked, unsure if she understood. The words sounded too gentle for a man that size. Her lips trembled. "But hunger." "I know hunger," he said, glancing at the children. "But some things feed the soul. You lose them, you starve in ways no bread can fix." He turned away as if to leave, and for an instant, despair rose again in her chest. Then she saw him reach into his coat. He pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth and set it on the edge of the well. "Take it," he said. "Bread. Dried meat. Enough for tonight." He didn't wait for thanks. He simply returned to his horse, rain dripping from the brim of his hat, and rode toward the northern trail. May watched him go until the mist swallowed him whole. The children tore open the bundle, a crust of bread, 2 strips of jerky, and a piece of dried apple. They ate in silence, rain mixing with tears. May did not touch the food. She only stared at the horizon where the rider had disappeared, her heart thudding with something unfamiliar. Not love, not yet, but the fragile pulse of being seen. When night came, she led her children to the edge of town, finding an abandoned wagon to shelter under. The wood smelled of rot and horses. She spread the linen beneath them, wrapped her arms around their small bodies, and closed her eyes. The bread had quieted their hunger, but her thoughts would not rest. Somewhere in that darkness, she saw the man again in her mind. His calm, his silence, the strange mercy of his words. She repeated them under her breath as if they were a prayer. "Don't sell what made you human." Outside, the rain eased. The prairie sighed. A wolf howled somewhere far away, answered only by the wind. And in the distance, faint through the curtain of mist, a single light flickered, a lantern swaying by the porch of a cabin in the northern hills. It burned steady against the storm, a golden promise that refused to die. May did not know why she couldn't look away. She watched that light until her eyes blurred. Then, in the soft hush between thunder and dawn, she made a decision she couldn't yet name, only that when morning came, her feet would follow the path the rider had taken, no matter how far or how cold. The children slept, their small breaths mingling with the smell of wet wood and earth. May pressed her hand against her chest, feeling her heart beat slow and uncertain, a sound she had almost forgotten belonged to her. Beyond the hills, lightning flared once, silent and white, revealing for a single breath the outline of the distant ranch where Eli Shepherd lived alone. And for the first time in weeks, May did not pray for bread. She prayed for the courage to knock on that door. The morning broke in silver mist and meadow breath. May followed the wagon ruts that wound through the valley, her 2 children trudging beside her, the bundle of bread long gone and the wedding dress pressed close against her chest. Every step was both promise and ache. The air still smelled of rain, and the earth, soft beneath her feet, seemed to remember every sorrow that crossed it. Somewhere ahead lay the light she had seen through the night, the lantern by the porch of a cabin on the northern ridge. By midday, her shoes had torn. Tao limped from cold. Yin's small hands clutched her sleeve, their fingers stiff and red. The land stretched wide and wordless. Then, through the veil of fog, a horse whinnied. The sound carried over the rise like a memory of mercy. When she reached the top of the hill, she saw it, a small ranch tucked between whispering pines and open pasture, smoke curling from a stone chimney, a fence made from split cedar, and a field that still slept under spring's thin sunlight. Eli Shepherd stood near the barn, mending a broken gate. His coat was off, sleeves rolled to the elbows, muscles steady and deliberate with work. When he noticed her, he didn't startle. He only straightened, squinting slightly, as if he'd been expecting this moment all along. May froze at the edge of the fence, children behind her. For a heartbeat, the wind moved between them, carrying the faint scent of pine sap and horses. He nodded once toward the cabin. "There's a fire inside," he said. His voice was the same as the night before, quiet, shaped like patience. She hesitated. "We can go after we rest," she murmured. He shook his head. "No need. Rest first." The cabin smelled of cedar and smoke. The warmth hit her like something too kind to believe. Eli moved around with calm purpose, tossing wood into the hearth, setting out tin cups, ladling water from a pot over the fire. He didn't look at her directly, as though giving her time to find her breath again. The children sat by the fire. Their faces, so long starved of color, began to glow faintly in the heat. May watched them eat pieces of boiled potato and salted meat that Eli placed before them without a word. When she tried to refuse, he raised one hand gently. "Eat," he said. "You can't thank me on an empty stomach." She obeyed. The food burned her throat, not from heat but from the shock of nourishment. When she glanced up, Eli had stepped outside, giving her space. She saw him through the window, standing in the pale sunlight, feeding his horse, his movements unhurried. It struck her how everything about him was built on silence. Even kindness, when he offered it, came like breath, not noise. When the children slept, she cleaned the wooden table, gathered the cups, and placed them neatly back where she found them. Eli came in quietly, carrying a bucket of water from the well. He noticed what she'd done but said nothing, only nodded. "You don't need to work," he said after a while. "I should," she replied softly. "Work keeps the heart steady." He studied her for a moment, the way her shoulders still carried tension even in peace. Then he turned toward the shelf above the hearth and took down a folded blanket. "You can stay till you figure where to go next," he said. "There's a spare cot by the window." Her lips parted, unsure whether to thank him or decline. "You don't even know my name." "I don't need to," he said. "You needed shelter. That's enough." She lay awake long after he'd gone to bed, listening to the faint crackle of fire and the children's breathing. In the half-dark, she saw the wedding dress hanging near the hearth where she had placed it to dry. The silk shimmered faintly in the light, like snow refusing to melt. It seemed almost alive, watching her, reminding her of who she once was. By dawn, the frost had gone from the grass. Birds began to stitch sound into the morning. May rose early, gathering what little strength she had left, and stepped outside. The valley rolled out in front of her like a painting made of wind. Eli was already up, kneeling beside a fence post, hands rough with work. She approached slowly, holding a wooden bucket. "I can fetch water," she said. He looked up, sun catching the edge of his scar. "You don't owe me labor." "It isn't debt," she said. "It's thanks." Something softened in his face. "Then we'll call it that." The days began to pass, quiet but full. May scrubbed the floor, mended the curtains, patched Eli's torn sleeve. He never asked her to. The children's laughter began to fill the corners of the cabin. They followed Eli around the yard, their small feet leaving prints in the damp soil. Tao pointed at the chickens with wonder. Ian gathered flowers by the fence. For every gesture of care she offered, Eli responded with space, not command. At the general store in town, word began to spread. "Shepherd's got himself a China woman now," one man said. "Looks like the lonely one finally bought company." When the gossip reached Eli, he didn't flinch. He only loaded his wagon with feed and replied, "Bought nothing. Just sharing what's right." But May heard the whispers too. When she went to the river to wash clothes, a woman from town passed by, her eyes sharp with judgment. "You best not get too comfortable," she said. "Men like him forget mercy when folks start talking." May bowed her head and kept scrubbing, though her hands trembled in the cold water. That night, she said little. Eli noticed. "Someone hurt your peace today?" "People don't need to hurt," she answered quietly. "They just have to speak." He nodded. "Words are worse than weather sometimes. They stay longer." A long silence stretched between them. The fire popped, throwing light over their faces. For the first time, she dared to meet his eyes. "Why do you help me?" she asked. "Most men look away." He poked at the fire with an iron rod, then set it down. Maybe because I know what it's like to be looked at wrong. His voice was low, almost lost to the crackle. My fiancée died before our wedding day. People said it was God's way of humbling me. I stopped listening after that. May watched the shadows move across his face, the pain carved deep but steady. You still keep going, she said. Because stopping don't bring anyone back. Outside, wind brushed against the cabin walls, soft as a hand on a wound. May wanted to tell him about her husband, about the explosion that took him, about the letter she never got to send. But she couldn't. The words stayed buried under years of silence. Instead, she rose and placed her wedding dress back on its hook. This was made by my mother, she said quietly. I thought selling it would feed us. But it would have ended something sacred. Eli looked at her, the reflection of fire dancing in his eyes. Some things you keep, he said. Not because they're useful, but because they remind you you're still alive. The next morning, the rain returned, soft, steady, cleansing. May stood on the porch watching it fall, the scent of wet earth thick in the air. Behind her, Eli was at the stove, pouring coffee into a tin cup. Ian and Tao chased each other near the door, laughing freely for the first time in weeks. She turned to him. If you wish us gone, we can leave when the rain stops. He handed her a cup of warm water instead. Stay till spring ends, he said. You'll know when it's time. The offer was plain, but the look that followed it wasn't. It carried something unspoken, trust, perhaps, or the first seed of belonging. May felt it take root somewhere deep. That night, when the fire dimmed and the world went quiet, she stood by the window, staring at the endless rain. The children slept beside her. Eli's silhouette moved faintly in the other room, slow and certain. And for the first time, she didn't feel invisible. She felt suspended between loss and something almost like grace. Her hand brushed against the wedding dress hanging by the hearth. The silk, warm from the fire, whispered softly between her fingers. She looked toward the door and thought of the path that led back to town, muddy, cruel, full of watching eyes, and then at the man who had not turned away. A thought formed, half prayer, half terror. What if this place could become home? Before she could answer herself, thunder rolled far across the plains, echoing like a promise. Spring arrived quietly, not in thunder or bloom, but in the gentleness of thawed soil and birds daring to sing again. The snow on the ridge melted into thin silver streams that laced through Eli's fields. The days grew long, and the children began to play in the light that spilled through the cabin's windows like forgiveness. The house, once filled with stillness, now breathed, slowly, cautiously, but alive. Mei Lian swept the porch each morning. The wooden planks still held the damp smell of rain, and when she lifted her head, she could see Eli out in the pasture, guiding the oxen through dark, glistening earth. His movements were steady, deliberate, and every turn of the soil looked like he was trying to bury an old hurt. She admired the way he never rushed, each motion born from quiet discipline. He returned near noon, hat low, boots heavy with mud. The children ran to him, Tao holding out a small wildflower. For your horse, the boy said shyly. Eli took it, a smile ghosting across his face. Reckon he'll like it. It was the first time May had seen him smile, and it startled her how kind it looked on a man who carried so much silence. She cooked for them then, cornbread made from old flour she found in the cupboard, broth thin but warm. As they ate, the air filled with small sounds, the clink of spoons, the rustle of wind against the window. She noticed Eli bowed his head before each meal, not in prayer perhaps, but in quiet acknowledgement of having survived one more day. The evenings brought stillness again. After the children slept, she mended clothes by the hearth, and he whittled small pieces of wood into shapes, birds, horses, once even a small carved spoon. He never explained why. She never asked. It was enough to sit together and let the fire speak. As April ripened, the first blossoms appeared on the apple trees near the creek. The petals drifted into the yard like pale snow, catching in May's hair as she hung laundry. Eli watched from the fence, resting his forearms on the wood, saying little. When she looked up and caught his gaze, something gentle passed between them, a recognition of loneliness eased, if only for that heartbeat. But kindness, on the frontier, rarely goes unpunished. It started with the whispers again. At the trading post, men glanced when Eli entered, some smirking, others scowling. "Shepherd's Cabin's got itself a foreign bride," one muttered. "Strange thing, how quick a man forgets his own kind." The words carried farther than they thought. By the time Eli returned home, May could see the storm in his shoulders. He unloaded the supplies in silence. The children sensed it and kept close to her skirts. Finally, as dusk settled, he said, "You should know folks are talking." She paused over the hearth. "About what?" "About us." The simple words landed like stones. She turned, her hands trembling faintly. "You have done nothing wrong." "Nor have you," he said. But talk doesn't care for truth. For a long time, neither spoke. The wind hissed under the door. May's throat burned with the same old ache, the one born in every place she had ever tried to belong. "Maybe we should leave when the weather warms," she said softly. Eli looked up sharply. "And go where?" "Anywhere they will stop seeing me." His jaw tightened. "If you keep running, they'll never stop." She wanted to argue, but the truth of it silenced her. She had been running since the day her husband's body was carried from the railroad line, crushed beneath timber and smoke. Even now, she woke sometimes with the sound of that explosion in her ears. That night she couldn't sleep. She stepped outside under the thin moon, barefoot in the cool grass. The air smelled of wet soil and pine. From the barn came a faint creak, the door shifting in the wind. She found Eli there, sitting on a stool beside his horse, running a cloth over the animal's mane. "You can't sleep either," she said. "Too many ghosts tonight." He glanced at her bare feet. "Ground's cold." "It reminds me I'm real," she said with a small smile. He studied her face for a long time, the lamplight softening the edges of his roughness. "Most folks don't talk like that." "Most folks don't listen long enough to hear," she answered. He nodded, then reached for a small loaf wrapped in cloth. "You left this on the table," he said. "You should eat more than you give away." She took it, fingers brushing his. The contact startled her, a flicker of warmth that made her step back. "You're kind," she said quietly. "No," he replied. "Just tired of seeing good things go hungry." The next morning, she rose before dawn, determined to repay something she could not name. She kneaded dough until her hands ached, stirred broth, and swept the floor twice. When Eli returned from the field, the scent of baking bread filled the cabin. It wasn't much, coarse flour, a little lard, but when the crust browned and cracked open, it smelled like home. They ate together that evening, sunlight pouring through the windows like honey. The children laughed between bites, crumbs dusting their lips. For the first time, the cabin didn't feel borrowed. It felt earned. When the plates were cleared, May said softly, "You gave us life again." Eli set down his cup, meeting her gaze. "You gave this house breath." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was full, like soil after rain. But spring's peace is fragile. That night, when Eli rode into town to deliver feed, two men waited outside the saloon. One spat tobacco and said, "You think you can bring that kind here and no one cares?" Eli didn't answer. The second man shoved him. "Ain't right, mixing blood like that." Eli's hand tightened, but he didn't strike. "You're drunk," he said quietly. "Go home." They didn't. A fist swung. It caught his jaw. He caught the next one and held it midair, grip unyielding. His eyes burned, not with rage, but disappointment. "I'll forget this happened," he said. "Don't make me remember." They stepped back, muttering, pride wounded. But when Eli returned home, there was blood on his knuckles. May saw it and froze. "You're hurt." "Not bad." "You fought because of me." He shook his head. "Because of small men who think cruelty makes them big." She cleaned the cut in silence. The lamplight flickered over his face, over the rough plains of a man who had known solitude too long. Her fingers trembled as she bound the cloth. "Why do you not hate them?" He looked at her with something unreadable. Because I remember what hate took from me. Her eyes lifted. Your fiancé? He nodded once. She wanted peace. I gave her a war inside my heart. I won't again. For a moment, the world narrowed to the space between them. The rhythm of breath, the sound of fire, the quiet grief of two people who had both lost something that could never be named aloud. She reached up, almost without thought, and brushed a strand of hair from his brow. You carry your pain well, she said. He caught her wrist gently. You shouldn't touch ghosts, he murmured. Her voice was barely a whisper. Sometimes that's how they leave. The words lingered long after she withdrew. Days later, she made a decision. Before dawn, she gathered the children, folded her wedding dress, and left a note on the table. Thank you for giving us warmth. But I cannot bring you more trouble. She walked toward the river, the world gray with mist. When Eli woke and found the note, something inside him snapped, not in anger, but in fear. He followed the prince through the dewy grass until he saw her at the water's edge, standing knee-deep, dress clutched in her arms as though she meant to let it drift away. Don't, he said softly behind her. She turned, startled. It brings shame to you. It brings truth, he said, stepping closer. And truth's worth more than comfort. He took the dress from her hands, dipped it gently into the river, and let it soak. The silk floated, catching sunlight like spilled moonlight. Then he lifted it out again, dripping and heavy. You see, it don't vanish. It carries what it's been through and still shines. Her lip trembled. I am so tired, Eli. I know, he said, voice breaking for the first time. But you ain't alone in it. She closed the distance between them then, leaning her forehead against his chest, tears mingling with the river spray. He didn't hold her at first, only let her be there, unjudged. Then, slowly, he raised his hand and rested it over her hair. When they returned to the cabin, the children still slept. The wet dress hung by the fire, gleaming faintly in the glow. Neither spoke. The air was thick with the fragile peace that follows confession. Later, as dawn unfolded, May watched sunlight scatter through the thin fabric. It looked almost like new snow. She smiled faintly, whispering to herself, not gone, only changed. Behind her, Eli stood in the doorway, watching her watch the light. The world outside stirred with wind and birdsong, but something deeper moved within them both, an understanding that what had begun as mercy was becoming something far harder to name. May turned toward him, her eyes wet but steady. Eli, she said, what happens when the world finds us again? He held her gaze, and the firelight flickered across the scar on his jaw like a vow. Then we face it together. She wanted to believe him. She almost did. But in her heart, she knew the world was not done testing them. And as the first knock of thunder rolled in the far distance, the silk dress swayed gently on its line, as if bracing for the storm to come. The storm came not with warning, but with whispers. The wind that morning had teeth, tearing across the plains, bending the pines until they groaned like old men. The sky turned the color of bruised pewter. Eli stood on the porch, hand on the post, eyes fixed on the horizon where the earth seemed to shiver. Beside the barn, May gathered the washing before the rain could take it, sheets and the pale wedding dress that fluttered like a captured ghost. He called out, "Leave it. The wind will do worse than the rain." But she shook her head. It survived worse. The dress slipped from her grip once, snapping in the gust before she caught it against her chest. For a moment, she laughed, breathless, and Eli felt something tighten in him. Fear, or perhaps awe, at how life insisted on returning to her face. By afternoon, the storm reached them. The sky split open, spilling rain so fierce it beat the soil flat. They brought the animals into the barn. The children huddled inside the cabin with blankets up to their chins. When it ended, the world was quiet again. Mud, mist, and a sky that could not decide whether to forgive or continue grieving. Eli rode into town the next morning for feed and word of the mail. May stayed behind to mend the garden fence. She felt light, almost unafraid now. The wedding dress hung in the open air, washed clean again, rippling softly as if breathing. Ian helped her water the seedlings, Tao chasing after a butterfly that refused to be caught. The peace lasted until she heard the hooves. 3 riders came down the path from town, dust and bitterness following them. She recognized one, Cal Morton, a man with a mouth too quick and a heart too small, the same who had thrown the first punch weeks before. They stopped by the gate, dismounting with the swagger of men who'd never been told no. "Well," Cal said, smirking, "if it ain't the shepherd woman. Or whatever you are." May's hands froze around the watering can. "Eli isn't here," she said, voice calm. "We know," the second man said. "We just came to remind you some of us don't take kindly to strangers claiming land that ain't theirs." "I claim nothing," she whispered. Cal's eyes drifted toward the dress swaying near the porch. "That yours?" "It's mine," she said. He stepped forward, reached for it. "Pretty thing. Shame it's wasted on." She snatched the fabric back, clutching it to her chest. "Don't." He grinned. "You talk bold for someone living off a man's charity." Before he could say more, the sound of hooves thundered again. Eli appeared over the ridge, coat dark, jaw set like carved stone. He rode hard, straight through the gate, dismounted before the dust even settled. "What's this?" His voice was quiet, dangerous. Cal sneered. "We were just payin' our respects to your new wife." "She's not," Eli began, then stopped. May flinched at the word left hanging. Cal saw it, laughed. "Not your wife, huh? Then what is she, shepherd? A stray? A toy?" Eli stepped forward so fast the man's laughter broke mid-breath. "You best leave." "Or what?" Eli's silence was answer enough. His hand hovered near the holster, not on it, just close enough that the air itself seemed to freeze. The other men shifted nervously. Cal spat to the side, muttering, "You're a fool." He turned back to his horse, but not before glancing once more at May, his gaze slick with contempt. "You'll regret this kindness, shepherd. Some stains don't wash off." When they rode away, the world felt smaller. The wind tugged at May's skirt, at the dress in her hands. Eli turned to her, voice low. "I should have been here." "You were," she said. "Just not soon enough." He looked at her then, really looked, and saw the tremor she tried to hide, the way her fingers clenched around the silk as if it were the last thread holding her steady. He took a step closer. "They won't touch you again." "You can't fight the whole town," she said. "I don't need to," he replied. "Just the kind that forget what it means to be human." The words hung between them, heavier than the clouds. She stared at him, water shining in her lashes. Not tears, but something deeper, the recognition of someone who had carried the same ache. That evening, she cooked quietly while he cleaned his tools by the window. The children whispered by the fire, building towers of sticks and pretending they were homes. The smell of bread filled the cabin again, soft and warm, as if daring the world to stay cruel. When the meal was done, Eli lingered at the table. "You were brave today," he said. "I was frightened," she answered. "Courage don't mean you're not," he said. "Just means you stayed." Something in her steadiness cracked then. "I've stayed before," she said softly, "and lost everything for it." He reached across the table, rough hand brushing hers. "You won't this time." For a heartbeat, the cabin went still. Then Ian giggled, breaking the spell, and the sound made May smile through the ache in her throat. Later that night, the moon rose full over the wet fields. May stepped outside alone, the wedding dress drying now in the silver light. It shimmered faintly, no longer just a symbol of sorrow but of survival. Eli joined her, standing a few steps away. "She'd be proud," he said. "Who?" "Whoever made it for you." May smiled faintly. "My mother's hands. She sewed it the week before I left China. Said it was for the day love found me." She paused, glancing at him. "She didn't say how many times it would have to find me before it stayed." He looked at her then, not as a man burdened by pity, but as one who understood that some beauty is built on pain. "Maybe it's found you now." Her heart fluttered like the fabric in her grip. She wanted to believe him, to let the warmth of those words melt years of fear. Instead, she asked, And if love brings more trouble? He took a slow breath, stepped closer until the distance between them was nothing but air trembling. Then we face it like we did the storm, side by side. The wind picked up, brushing her hair across her face. She felt his hand lift, gentle, tucking it behind her ear. The touch lingered, unspoken, steady, a promise rather than a plea. "Eli," she whispered, "why do you keep saving me?" He shook his head. "You think you're the only one being saved?" The moonlight silvered his scar, turned his eyes soft. She reached out, fingers trembling, and touched his cheek. "Then let's save each other," she said. And he kissed her, not with hunger, but with reverence. The kind of kiss that sealed something wordless between two people who had already lost too much. When they parted, the wind swept through the valley, lifting the wedding dress from its line. It danced in the air, spinning, twisting, catching moonlight until it looked like a spirit ascending. May gasped and reached for it, but Eli caught her hand instead. "Let it go," he murmured. She watched as it floated higher, carried toward the creek, the fabric glowing white against the dark. When it finally fell, it landed softly in the field, untorn, unbroken, alive. Tao's sleepy voice came from the doorway. "Mama, your dress is flying." May turned, smiling through tears. "Yes," she whispered. "It finally remembers how." Eli stepped beside her, arm brushing hers. "So do you." The night settled around them like a blessing. The children went back inside, and the two of them stood watching the field long after the wind had stilled. When dawn came, the world felt remade, wet grass sparkling, the sky washed clean. May found the dress caught on a fence post, swaying gently. She lifted it free and held it to her heart. The silk smelled of rain and freedom. Eli came up behind her, his voice low. "Would you wear it again?" She turned, eyes bright in the morning light. "For what reason?" "For tomorrow," he said simply. "For us." Her breath caught. "You mean?" He nodded, a rare smile breaking through. "I've no preacher, no ring, no fine church. But I've got land that'll keep us fed and a heart that's yours if you'll have it." The words filled the space between them like sunlight spilling into shadow. May pressed the dress against her chest, shaking her head in disbelief. "After everything, you still choose me?" "I never stopped," he said. The wind rose again, soft and warm now, carrying the scent of apple blossoms from the creek. May looked down at the fabric in her arms, the same dress she once tried to sell for bread, and whispered, "Then maybe it was always meant for this." By noon, they stood beneath the apple trees, the children weaving wildflowers into her hair. Eli took her hands, rough and trembling, and said only, "No man buys what God already joined through kindness." When the vows were spoken, the wind caught the edges of her dress again, lifting it like wings. May laughed, eyes glistening. The sound carried across the fields, pure, alive, unafraid. And somewhere in that sound, the ghosts that had followed them finally quieted. If you've ever known hunger, of body or of heart, may you find someone who feeds both. Now, tell me, where in the world are you watching from tonight? And click on the story on your screen. The next one's even deeper than this one. You'll feel it, I promise.